I'm thrilled to bring you a sneak preview of the first episode of Change in One Generation, a new podcast series about young South Africans rising above hardship and adapting to change. The show is hosted by legendary journalist Ruda Landman and leadership expert Dr. Frank Magwegwe.
Hello and welcome to the Change Exchange, where we talk about the change moments in life, how we make it happen, and how we deal with it when life makes it happen. I am your host, Ruda Landman. This podcast series was born of the realization that South Africa is going through a remarkable shift. Many people who are now stepping into leading roles come from homes where maybe their parents did not have the opportunity to fulfill their potential through study or otherwise. And in one generation, they are changing their own and often their family's environment completely. I'm joined at the microphone by Dr. Frank Magwegwe, whose own story illustrates what we're talking about. He was once homeless, and now he teaches financial wellness and personal empowerment at GIBS, the Gordon Institute of Business Science in Johannesburg. And one of his main areas of research is the science of change. So, we're going to introduce you to wonderful guests who will tell us their story of change. And Dr. Frank will help us understand it in much more depth by putting a theoretical framework around it. We have a great guest in studio with us today, but I'll surprise you with that later. First, Dr. Frank, science of change. Is it even possible to say that, to make up a formula for change?
Absolutely, Ruda, it is. I'm so excited. Stories of change really help us to unpack how people deal with change. And often, when people look out to others, they think they're different from me, they're special. That's why they have been able to change in one generation and achieve amazing stuff. So what we want to do on this podcast is to take away the black box of change, is to bring research, is to bring formulas that are out there that really speak to what do people who are able to navigate change, what do they do different from those who perhaps are find it a little bit challenging to deal with change. And there lies in the science of change. We need to understand those who are good at change, what is it that they do? And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from our guests on that.
You've even distilled what looks like a mathematical formula.
Absolutely. One of my very, very, very exciting moments a couple of years ago was coming across this idea of the change formula. Literally, Ruda, transformed my life. I've always been interested in change, my own story of change, but how do people navigate change? Then boom, one day I'm just doing my research. I'm thinking about how do I communicate the ideas around change? And I come across this formula. And it's so simple, Ruda. It's so intuitive. It simply says, for change to happen, 3 things need to be in place. The first one, the individual must have some sense of being dissatisfied with their status quo. In other words, I'm kind of unhappy. I don't like how things are currently. So that's the D in this formula. Then we've got a V. V really speaks to a vision. I like to think of it more as a compelling vision. The idea that I sit and say to myself, when this change has taken place, there is the future that I will be part of, and it's so exciting, right? That's what enables you to want to embark on this change because the vision is so compelling. But of course, research tells us you may be dissatisfied, you may have the vision, but if you cannot take baby steps, if you cannot take the first step toward that change, it will be very difficult to start that journey of change. And so there, folks, you've got it. The change formula simply says D times V times F has to be greater than resistance to change for any person to be able to navigate change. And of course, it's important, Ruda. I didn't say D plus V plus F. I said times. That is very important and deliberate. Because what it's telling us is this. None of those three elements can be a zero. As we all know, 0 times anything is a 0. You need a little bit of the dissatisfaction with the status quo. You need some compelling vision, and definitely you need to be able to take those first steps. I like to think of them as baby steps. And there is the change formula. And it will really underpin a lot of our work during this podcast series.
Let me immediately bring in our guest because she's nodding her head off. Offense Pitse, you are an architect and first black South African woman to conduct and own an all-black orchestra, classical orchestra, I assume. I mean, there have been bands, but not orchestra. Youngest black woman to be a conductor, Mail and Guardian's Power of Woman 2022 recipient. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I mean, thank you for having me on this very interesting morning when you're talking about change formulas.
Why were you so in such agreement with what Dr. Frank was saying?
I was in such agreement because with change, there's a lot of resistance, right? And that really tied into my story. And especially when you mentioned the baby steps, right? So that immediately took me to when I was a kid. And then all you have as a kid is just dreams, and you everything is limitless as a kid. And then you grow up and then you're dealing with real life stuff, right? So I always try and maintain looking at the world with the same eyes I had as a kid, right? Because resistance will always be there. So I always try to keep that at the core of everything that I do. So that is always my subject matter, looking at the world through the eyes of a child. So in that way, resistance will come, each level, new devil. So I that's what I say, new level, new devil. But if you keep your eyes just tethered to that of a child, you will, I guess you will not stop. And that honestly is my formula. I just have to put it down scientifically.
Let's take you back to when you were a child. Your mother and your grandparents played an enormous role. Tell us about them.
I mean, my mom was a powerhouse, right? She was a powerhouse of note. You see me, you see my mother, right? So my mother was an individual, right? See, she always broke molds. She never followed the status quo. So, I mean, also in that era where you find that parents are very strict. Parents tell you what to do, what not to do. My mom would be very respectful to my grandparents, but would have time to sneak out and be her own person. So because of that, she never told me what to do, what to be. She would always be like, okay, what do you want to do? Which school do you want to go to? Okay, what is needed? And I mean, at that time, with her educator's salary, the little that she made, she always made sure that whatever I needed, I never lacked, especially in terms of education. So that was always at the core of my upbringing. My grandparents as well. So it was like generational passing on of the proverbial baton of education that, in order to be great, you need to believe in something that is greater than yourself. And that was always like my upbringing, that education's at the core of it. But also they really instilled being an individual and would always ask me, what is it that you want to do? And they would always question, are you sure about that? So I was a kid already reasoning, I already had that mind. So I guess that is the kind of upbringing I had in a
yes, you were lucky.
Very educational, very educated and educational home. Yeah.
Dr. Frank, the role of the first people we meet in our lives?
I was listening to that with so much interest because a couple of things, come out. And I think, Ruda, you're quite right when you say you were lucky because often, particularly in South Africa, young people didn't get an opportunity, to grow up in an environment like that. And that environment is so key. When you look at research, for example, research around change, one of the things that happens when we're young people and we're taking, offense back to when she was a kid, is this idea of what is my identity, right? Who am I? And it's not only who am I is okay, you're figuring it out as you start. But an even more important question that I got a sense from offense that was part of her upbringing is, who can I be? Who can I become? And that really talks to a fancy word we use in research around this idea of social norms. Are you growing up being told girls can only achieve the following, boys can only achieve the following? Are you growing up being told you don't ask grown-ups questions? We tell you what to do and you listen. Are you being raised with the opportunity, even as a young person, of saying, but this is what I think? And then you get an opportunity, to kind of, argue why you think that way, how you see the world that way, without being told it's wrong, without being told you're too young, just listen to us. So that idea of societal or norms is so critical in building an identity. And as you see, I'm sure in this story, identity, a key part of navigating change.
People don't spend a lot of time thinking about financial services. They simply think about the money they need to do things and the things they need to do with money. That's why at BrightRock, we don't think of ourselves as a financial services provider. Rather, we're a money company. In fact, we're the needs-matched money company. Everything we do is about meeting people's changing needs. That's why we created the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes. And because we want to meet people's changing needs throughout their lives, we set out to learn everything and share everything there is to know about change. We call it Change Science, and you can learn all about it at the Change Exchange, a free resource that's filled with tips, tools, and inspiring stories to help you navigate change in your life. You can find more on changeexchange.co.za or on your preferred podcast platform. Just search for Change Exchange. Made just for you by BrightRock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.
Welcome back to Change in One Generation, where our guest is Ofense Pitse, architect and conductor. You managed to go to Pro Arte, the school in Pretoria, the art school.
That's reg so.
But it wasn't. But it wasn't easy. You were getting up at 4 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the school across the road or Daddy's SUV.
Mm-hmm.
And at the school, when you wanted to take music, you were rebuffed. Yeah. They said, you don't have a piano. You're not one of us.
Yes. So ek is van 'n tweetalige skool af. Pro Arte Alphenpad coming out. Right? You cannot not be from Pretoria and not say that. Yes, that's right. So I would get up at 4 a.m. and again, support of my mother. So my mom would she would make sure that things were easy. So she would make my lunchbox, my school uniform was ironed, my socks were there. I would just have to polish my shoes the night before, and then she would just accompany me by where I would take the taxi. So she would just either be holding my bag or whatever. And so that type of support always made me feel like, shucks, I have to take two modes of transport before I get to this pot of gold, which is really my education and really a good education, right? And then I have to get to school 7:30 in the morning, and I have to go through all of these difficult subjects and all that and still make it through, right?
But was music your thing?
Art was always my thing. So I was always the one drawing. My mom would bring me like exam pads from school, pencils, pens, and all of these things. So I was just always the artist of the family. And the music thing just came, again, when things are passed on in the spiritual sense from one person to the other. So I get this gift from my grandfather, right, who was an exceptional jazz musician who played the trumpet, funny enough. And then he was also a conductor of the Jazz Maniacs. So art was always my thing. But when I got to Pro Arte and I saw the music department, I was like, shucks, I also play the instrument at church. I play the trumpet at church. So I just wanted to touch the piano, honestly, because I was like, wow, I always see at assembly, they always play this grand Yamaha.
And how did you respond when this teacher said, this is not for you?
Oh, that for me, it shattered any ounce of dream that I had. So for the longest time, I had this trauma response to music. Right. So because remembering how I felt when I, came across these young instrumentalists from Katlehong, I was like, I don't ever want them to feel the same way that I felt. So because of, I know how it feels to be told that because you don't have this, so you don't have access, or we cannot grant you access. So I felt like I don't want another young person to ever, if I have the power to change that, I don't want another young person to ever feel like that. So
that's the same thought that you expressed in an interview where you said you want to give the black child and the black girl child a place at the table.
Exactly, a seat at the table. So because of that, I remember even stopping I would never walk past the music department. I would take the longer route. So even if I have to go to like an English or a physics class, I would just, because I'm like, even hearing the tones of the piano or whatever instruments would just make me feel like I can never attain that. So it would kind of like limit me, and I did not like that feeling. So that was always my, I guess, the fuel of how I'm here today, because I was like, I don't want another young person to ever be told because you are from Mabopane, you're from Katleho, you're from Tembisa, you cannot be a musician or even play an instrument.
This is not open for you.
This is not open for you.
Dr. Frank, you've made frantic notes.
Frantic notes.
I am, because I'm thinking, my goodness, I'm so excited because when we listen to stories of change, we're able to distill, like I said in the intro, those who successfully navigate change. What is it that they do different from people who struggle with change? And here we've got this nugget, Ruda. That's why I just had to write it down. So an important part of navigating change is earlier obstacles or earlier difficulties in life, right? Is experiencing, and we've got a fancy word in research, we call it resilience. Really, this idea of successfully overcoming obstacles, overcoming challenges. And it is so interesting that Offenza used the word that we often attach to the idea, Ruda, of resilience. She said she experienced trauma when she was walking past the music department, right?
Yes.
And resilience specifically talks to that. Trauma, tragedy, difficulties, and what happens to an individual who have gone through that. They deal with that challenge, and we can come a little bit later to how they deal with it. But what happens to them is that because they successfully navigated the difficulties, a mindset starts establishing within themselves.
You get
and they
fit
say,
for change.
You get fit for change. You get prepared for change. And you say to yourself, you face a few obstacles, and you say to yourself, my goodness, let me think about that trauma. Let me think about that challenge that I faced. How did I navigate it? Wait a minute. If I could navigate that, I'm ready for this one. And so we learn. Part and parcel of navigating change is having overcome some difficulties earlier in life.
And then architecture. Why architecture, and where did you get the funding?
Oof.
Because this was before NSFAS, huh?
This was before NSFAS. It was in the formative years of NSFAS, right?
Yeah.
So architecture, because, I mean, again, I did arts. So my gift is the gift of art. So from a kid, I was drawing, like in preschool, kids were drawing Stickman. I was drawing like SpongeBob, Johnny Bravo, like cartoon characters, you know, like my gym partner is a monkey. I had that understanding. So I don't know how my mind was wired as a kid.
To hear the rest, subscribe to Change in One Generation on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify, or go to changepodcasts.co.za for more information.